What you're about to witness is the story of Vincent Morrison, a brilliant engineer whose stolen innovations built an entire industry, but who has spent 3 years living homeless in Washington's Raven's Nest Gorge, surviving on foraged food and rainwater. When a violent storm traps Constance Porter, one of America's most powerful automotive CEOs, with a catastrophically failed engine in those remote mountains, the ragged man who emerges from the wilderness to save her life asks for only one thing. In return, food. What she discovers when she investigates this mysterious mechanic will expose the biggest corporate conspiracy in automotive history, destroy the billionaire who betrayed him, and transform both their lives forever in just 48 hours. A simple promise of a meal will trigger a revolution that reaches the highest levels of corporate America, proving that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is someone with nothing left to lose. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The first drops of rain struck Constance Porter's windshield like scattered gunshots as her black Mercedes SUV climbed the winding mountain road through Washington's Cascade Range. Dark clouds had been gathering for the past hour, transforming what should have been a peaceful afternoon drive into something far more ominous. She had taken this route to clear her head after a particularly brutal board meeting at Porter Automotive Technologies, where shareholders had questioned her latest acquisition strategy. With their usual blend of skepticism and barely concealed hostility, the storm hit with startling suddenness. One moment, she was navigating gentle curves through towering pine trees, and the next sheets of rain hammered her vehicle with such intensity that her wipers could barely keep pace. Lightning split the darkening sky, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the very mountains around her. Constance gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white against the leather as visibility dropped to mere yards. Then the engine coughed. It was a sound she had never heard from any vehicle in her extensive fleet, a wet grinding noise that sent ice through her veins. The SUV lurched forward, its sophisticated systems flickering as warning lights began dancing across the dashboard like angry fireflies. The engine coughed again, more violently this time, and then died completely. Momentum carried her another 100 yards before the vehicle rolled to a stop on the narrow shoulder, dangerously close to a steep drop-off that vanished into the mist below. Constance sat in stunned silence for several seconds, listening to the rain drumming against the roof while her mind processed what had just happened. She was stranded on a mountain road, with no cell phone signal in the middle of a storm that showed no signs of abating. "Come on, start," she whispered, turning the key. Nothing. The dashboard remained dark, not even the courtesy lights responding to her attempts. She tried again, pumping the gas pedal, but the engine remained as lifeless as stone. Constance pulled out her phone, hoping against hope, but the display showed exactly what she expected. No service. The nearest town was at least 20 miles behind her, and she had not passed another vehicle in over an hour. The reality of her situation began to settle in like a cold weight. In her stomach, she was alone, stranded, and completely at the mercy of the elements. The temperature had dropped noticeably since the storm began, and she could see her breath fogging in the increasingly cold air. Her business suit, perfectly appropriate for climate-controlled boardrooms, offered little protection against the mountain chill. She had no survival gear, no emergency supplies, nothing but the designer purse that held her useless phone and credit cards. As if sensing her growing desperation, the storm-intensified wind howled through the trees with such force that her vehicle rocked slightly, and the rain came down so hard it sounded like marbles being thrown against the metal roof. Lightning illuminated the forest in stark, terrifying detail before plunging everything back into premature darkness. That was when she saw him. At first, Constance thought her eyes were playing tricks on her through the rain-streaked passenger window. She glimpsed a figure moving between the trees, with purpose and confidence that seemed impossible in such conditions. The figure appeared to be walking directly toward her vehicle, though she could not imagine how anyone could navigate the treacherous terrain in this weather. As the shape drew closer, she could make out more details. It was a man, tall and lean, wearing what appeared to be layers of weathered clothing that somehow shed the rain like it was nothing more than morning dew. His hair was long and unkempt, his face obscured by shadow and distance, but his movement spoke of someone completely at home in this wild environment. Constance felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that she was no longer alone, but apprehension about who this person might be and what He might want stories of mountain hermits and dangerous drifters flashed through her mind, but her practical nature quickly dismissed such fears. Whatever unknown quantity this man represented, he was her only option for getting out of this situation, alive. The man approached her driver's side window and tapped gently on the glass up close. Constance could see that he was younger than his weathered appearance initially suggested, perhaps in his mid-40s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were indeed multiple layers. A canvas jacket over what looked like a hand-knit sweater. All of it clearly designed for extended outdoor living rather than fashion. She rolled down the window partway rain immediately, spattering her face and shoulder engine trouble. He asked, his voice carrying easily over the storm. There was something unexpected in his tone, education refinement qualities that did not match his appearance. It just died, Constance replied. Having to raise her voice against the wind, everything went dark, no warning, nothing. The man nodded as if this information told him more than it did her electrical failure. Most likely this storm is playing havoc with anything. Electronic, I'm Vincent, mind if I take a look? Something in his calm competence made her decision for her. Please, yes. I'm Constance. Vincent moved to the front of the vehicle, and Constance watched through the windshield as he lifted the hood with practiced ease. What happened next defied everything she thought she knew about automotive repair. Instead of the usual poking and prodding she had witnessed in countless garage visits, Vincent seemed to diagnose the problem through some combination of touch sight and intuition that bordered on the mystical. His hands moved over the engine components with surgical precision, pausing here and there, as if he were reading the mechanical equivalent of Braille. Even in the driving rain he appeared, completely focused, unaffected by the conditions that had her shivering inside the cabin. After several minutes, Vincent closed the hood and returned to her window. Water streamed from his hair and clothes, but he seemed as comfortable as if he were standing in a warm garage. Your main computer module has been fried by the electrical storm, he said. Matter-of-factly took out most of your ignition system with it. It's not something you can fix with standard roadside assistance. Constance felt her heart sink. So what does that mean? How long until someone can get here to tow me out? Vincent glanced up at the storm, which showed no signs of diminishing in this weather. On this road could be days before a tow truck can safely make it up here, and that's assuming you can somehow get word to them. The reality of spending days trapped in her vehicle with no heat and dwindling hope of rescue made her stomach clench with fear. There has to be something, some way to get it running even temporarily. Vincent studied her, face for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. Finally, he nodded slowly. There might be. I can try to bypass the computer system entirely. Wire it directly through the alternator. It would be a temporary fix at best, and it would require some improvisation materials I can gather from the forest. It won't be pretty, and it definitely won't be covered by your warranty, but it should get you running long enough to reach civilization. The idea of this strange forest dweller performing some kind of mechanical miracle using nothing but wilderness resources seemed impossible. But Constance found herself clinging to any hope he offered. How long would it take? Give me an hour, maybe 2. The rain is actually helpful, keeps everything cool while I work, but I should warn you, even if this works, you'll need to drive slowly and stop if anything feels wrong. Constance nodded eagerly. Whatever it takes. What do you need from me? Just stay warm and dry in there, let me work. Vincent paused, then added with a slight smile. And maybe don't watch too closely, you might not approve of my methods for the next 90 minutes. Constance alternated between dozing fitfully and watching Vincent work with growing amazement. True to his word, he disappeared into the forest several times, returning with what looked like random organic materials. Strips of bark, certain types of leaves, even what appeared to be moss. Each time he returned to work under the hood, his movements became more confident and purposeful. She could not see exactly what he was doing, but she could hear the occasional sound of metal being bent or repositioned, always followed by testing motions that suggested he was checking connections. Most remarkable was his apparent immunity to the weather while she grew colder. Despite being inside the vehicle, Vincent worked steadily in the driving rain as if it were a minor inconvenience. Finally, he closed the hood and walked back to her window, this time carrying a small bundle wrapped in what looked like treated canvas. Try starting it now, he said simply. Constance turned the key with no real expectation of success to her astonishment. The engine caught immediately, settling into a rough but steady idle. The dashboard lights flickered back to life and blessed warm air began flowing from the heating vents. She stared at Vincent in disbelief. What did you do? Replaced your computer with something more reliable. It's not elegant, but it should get you home. Just remember to drive slowly, especially downhill. This is incredible. You saved my life. How can I possibly repay you? Vincent shifted the canvas bundle in his hands, and for the first time since he had appeared, he looked somewhat uncomfortable. Actually, I was hoping you might be able to help me with something small. Anything. Name it. I haven't had a real meal in several days, been living on berries and whatever I can forage. If you could bring me some food tomorrow, maybe some bread, canned goods, anything you can spare. His voice trailed off as if he were embarrassed by the request. Constance felt a shock of recognition, not of the man himself, but of the situation. Here was someone who had just performed what could only be described as mechanical magic, saving her from a potentially life-threatening situation, and all he wanted in return was food. The contrast between his extraordinary skill and his humble circumstances struck her with unexpected force. Food, she repeated, making sure she had heard correctly. Vincent nodded. I know it's not much payment for what I've done, but it's what I need most right now. Of course, absolutely. But Vincent, what you just did, I've never seen anything like it. Where did you learn to work on cars like that? Something flickered across his face, pain perhaps, or memory. Long story, another time maybe. As Constance put the vehicle in gear, she found herself reluctant to leave this mysterious man behind. Something about him, his competence, his intelligence, the sadness that seemed to hover around him like a shadow, made her want to understand how someone with such remarkable abilities had ended up living alone in the mountains. Where can I find you tomorrow? She asked. Vincent pointed deeper into the forest toward an area that looked completely impassable. Follow the old logging trail about a mile in that direction, you'll find me. Vincent, she called as he began to walk away. Thank you, really, you saved my life tonight. He turned back briefly, rain still cascading down his face. Just bring the food, Constance, that's all the thanks I need. As she drove slowly down the mountain, her headlights cutting through the storm, Constance found her mind racing with questions. Who was this man? How had he learned to perform such an impossible repair? And perhaps most intriguingly, what circumstances had led someone with such obvious expertise to end up living as a hermit in the Cascade Mountains? By the time she reached the main highway, she had made a decision. She would bring Vincent his food as promised, but she would also do something else. She would find out exactly who he was and how he had come to possess the kind of knowledge that had saved her life. Something told her that Vincent Morrison's story was far more complex and significant than a simple case of a homeless man helping a stranded motorist. What she could not possibly know was that her decision to investigate further would uncover the biggest corporate conspiracy in automotive history, destroy lives, restore a stolen legacy, and ultimately transformed the entire industry. She had spent her career building all because a man living in the forest had asked for nothing more than a meal. In exchange for a miracle, telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of Raven's Nest Gorge as Constance Porter made her way along the barely visible logging trail Vincent had described. She carried 2 heavy grocery bags filled with more food than any one person could consume in a week. Canned goods, fresh bread, dried fruits, protein bars, and even a thermos of hot coffee. She had prepared before leaving her Seattle penthouse at dawn. The trail proved more challenging than she had anticipated. What appeared from the road to be a simple path into the woods revealed itself as a complex network of animal tracks, fallen logs, and steep descents that required careful navigation. Her designer hiking boots, purchased more for appearance than function, slipped occasionally on the moss-covered rocks that lined the creek, running through the gorge. After 20 minutes of steady climbing, she heard the sound of metal striking metal in a steady, rhythmic pattern. Following the sound deeper into the forest, she emerged into a small clearing that took her breath away. Not for its natural beauty, though that was considerable, but for the evidence of human ingenuity that filled every corner of the space. Vincent's camp was unlike anything she had expected. Rather than the crude shelter she had imagined, she found herself looking at what could only be described as an outdoor engineering laboratory. A large, military-style tent occupied the center of the clearing, but surrounding it were carefully constructed work areas that demonstrated both skill and long-term planning. A water, he built entirely from salvaged materials and fallen branches turned slowly in the creek that bordered the camp. Copper wire, apparently recovered from abandoned equipment, had been wound into coils that generated enough electricity to power a series of LED lights strung throughout the work area. Solar panels, obviously scavenged from various sources, supplemented the water wheel's output during daylight hours. Most impressive was the workshop area itself. Vincent had constructed a forge from river stones and clay, with a bellow system that used the natural wind patterns of the gorge to maintain consistent temperature, and tools hung from a wooden frame, each one either professionally manufactured or crafted with such precision that they rivaled factory-made equivalents. Vincent emerged from behind a large pine tree, carrying an armload of freshly cut branches. He had clearly been working for hours already, his clothes bearing evidence of various projects: metal shavings, wood dust, and what looked like engine oil. Despite the absence of any vehicles in the camp, Constance, he said, his face brightening with genuine surprise, "I wasn't sure you would come." "I gave you my word," she replied, setting down the grocery bags. "Besides, after what you did last night, this is the least I could do." Vincent approached the bags with visible emotion, kneeling beside them, as if they contained precious cargo, rather than simple food. As he began examining the contents, Constance found herself studying his living situation more closely. "Vincent, how long have you been living out here?" 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. He answered without hesitation, as if the precise count was important to him. "Not that I'm keeping track or anything." The specificity of his answer combined with the sophisticated nature of his camp raised new questions in Constance's mind. This was not the setup of someone who had simply chosen to live off the grid temporarily. This represented years of careful planning and engineering expertise applied to survival living. "This place is incredible," she said, gesturing toward the water wheel and electrical system. "Where did you learn to build things like this?" Vincent paused in his examination of the groceries, his hand stilling on a can of soup. "You pick things up when you have time. To think and experiment, come on." "Vincent, nobody just picks up this level of technical knowledge. This water, he alone represents advanced understanding of hydraulic engineering, and what you did to my car last night, that wasn't improvisation. That was expertise." For several minutes, Vincent continued unpacking groceries without responding. Finally, he stood and walked to his work area, returning with a metal object that made Constance gasp with recognition. "You know what this is?" he asked, holding up what appeared to be a miniature transmission component machined to tolerances that would require industrial equipment to achieve. "That's a planetary gear assembly," Constance replied immediately. "But it's been modified somehow. The gear ratios are different from anything I've seen in production vehicles." Vincent's eyebrows rose slightly. "Most people wouldn't recognize it, let alone understand the modifications." "I'm not most people. I'm the CEO of Porter Automotive Technologies. I've been around automotive engineering my entire career." Something shifted in Vincent's expression. Surprise followed quickly by what might have been concern or even fear. He set the gear assembly down carefully, as if buying time to think. "Porter Automotive," he repeated slowly. "Maximilian Porter's company. You knew my late husband. I knew of him. His reputation, anyway. He was supposed to be one of the honest ones in the industry." The past tense and the qualification in Vincent's statement struck Constance as odd, but before she could pursue it further, Vincent turned toward his tent. "Let me show you something," he said, disappearing inside the canvas structure while he was gone. Constance examined the gear assembly more closely. The modifications were not random improvements, but rather systematic changes that would significantly increase efficiency while reducing weight. This was the work of someone with deep understanding, not just of mechanical principles, but of automotive engineering specifically. Vincent emerged carrying a weatherproof case that had clearly seen better days inside, wrapped in multiple layers of protective material with technical drawings and documentation that made Constance's pulse quicken. "These are engine designs," she said, spreading the papers on his work. "Vincent, these are revolutionary. This hybrid system could Increase fuel efficiency by 40% while actually improving performance. 43%. Vincent corrected quietly. I built 3 working prototypes before he stopped mid-sentence, as if he had said more than he intended before. What Vincent gathered the papers, quickly as if regretting showing them to her before I ended up here. Constance felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to take shape in her mind. Though the complete picture remained frustratingly elusive. Vincent, who are you really? These designs? This level of technical expertise, you're not just some homeless man who happens to be good with cars. I was never good with cars, Vincent replied, his voice carrying a bitterness that seemed to surprise him. I was good with ideas. Cars were just the application. The distinction struck Constance as significant, though she could not immediately articulate why. What happened? How did you end up living in the mountains instead of working for automotive companies that would pay millions for these innovations? Vincent walked to the edge of his camp, looking out over the gorge below. Have you ever trusted someone completely? Constance shared everything you had created, everything you dreamed of building, only to discover that trust was the most expensive mistake you could make. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Constance found herself moving closer, drawn by the obvious depth of his experience. Someone stole your work, she said, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Someone stole my life. Vincent corrected. My work, my reputation, my family, my future. Everything I had built over 15 years of research and development. Who? Vincent turned back toward her, his face displaying a complex mixture of anger and resignation. His name is Reginald Foster. He was my business partner, my closest friend, the best man at my wedding, and he destroyed everything I had ever worked for. The name sent a shock of recognition through Constance. Reginald Foster was currently one of Porter Automotive's major suppliers, providing advanced engine components that had helped establish their company as an industry leader. Vincent, Reginald Foster supplies parts to my company. His innovations have been revolutionary. His innovations, Vincent repeated with bitter emphasis. Every patent he holds, every design he has marketed, every breakthrough that made him a billionaire. All of it was stolen from me. Constance felt the ground shifting beneath her understanding of both the automotive industry and her own company's supply chain. If Vincent was telling the truth, then Foster Industries had built its empire on fraud, and Porter Automotive had unknowingly become part of that conspiracy. You have proof of this. Vincent gestured toward the weatherproof case. 3 years of documentation, original designs, dated prototypes, correspondence showing the timeline of development, everything except the resources to fight someone with Foster's wealth and legal team. Why haven't you taken this to the authorities? Vincent's laugh was hollow and bitter. I tried. Foster's lawyers buried me in motions and depositions while simultaneously launching a campaign to destroy my professional reputation. They accused me of corporate espionage, breach of contract, even mental instability. By the time I realized what was happening, I was unemployable, divorced, and facing bankruptcy. The scope of the conspiracy Vincent described was staggering. But what shocked Constance more was her growing certainty that he was telling the truth. His technical knowledge, the precision of his designs, even his obvious familiarity with industry personalities, all of it pointed to someone who had operated at the highest levels of automotive engineering. Vincent, what you're describing is criminal fraud on a massive scale. If you have documentation proving Foster stole your work, then you have the evidence needed to expose him. Evidence that's been sitting in a tent in the mountains for 3 years, while Foster's company has grown exponentially. Vincent replied, evidence that would be my word against that of a billionaire with unlimited legal resources and a reputation for destroying anyone who challenges him. Constance looked around the camp again, seeing it now, not as an impressive survival setup, but as a monument to wasted potential. Here was a man whose innovations could have transformed the automotive industry, reduced pollution, saved consumers, billions in fuel costs, and instead he was living in isolation, while the man who had robbed him profited from his genius. What if it wasn't just your word? She asked slowly. What do you mean? What if someone with resources, someone with standing in the industry, someone who had unknowingly been buying Foster's stolen innovations, decided to investigate these claims? Vincent studied her face carefully, that someone would be putting themselves at considerable risk. Foster doesn't just steal, Innovations, he destroys anyone who threatens his empire. Let me worry about Foster, Constance replied. You kept your documentation for 3 years. You've been waiting for the right opportunity, the right ally. Maybe this is it. Vincent was quiet for a long time, watching the water. He turned in the creek while he considered her offer. Finally, he looked back at her with an expression that mixed hope with deep caution. Constance, you have no idea what you would be getting into. Foster has connections throughout the industry, influence with regulatory agencies, relationships with media outlets. He's not just a businessman, he's a predator who has built his fortune on destroying people like me. Then maybe it's time someone with resources fought back. Constance replied, You saved my life last night, Vincent. Let me return the favor. As they stood in the clearing, surrounded by evidence of both human ingenuity and corporate betrayal, neither of them could imagine how completely their partnership would transform not only their own lives, but the entire landscape of American automotive manufacturing. But in that moment, for the first time in 3 years, Vincent Morrison allowed himself to believe that justice might still be possible. Constance Porter's corner office on the 32nd floor of Porter Automotive Technologies commanded a sweeping view of Seattle's downtown skyline. But this Monday morning, she barely glanced at the familiar panorama. Instead, she focused intently on the computer screen, displaying Foster Industries' contract history with her company, scrolling through 5 years of purchasing agreements. That suddenly seemed far more significant than routine supplier relationships. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 3 years alone, Porter Automotive had paid Foster Industries nearly $200 million for engine components, transmission systems, and hybrid technology innovations. Each major breakthrough that had helped establish Porter as an industry leader bore Reginald Foster's patent signature and commanded premium pricing that Foster had justified through claims of exclusive research and development. Genevieve Walsh, Constance's executive assistant, entered carrying a stack of technical files that Constance had requested first thing that morning. These are all the Foster Industries contracts from the past 5 years, Genevieve said, setting the documents on the conference table, plus the technical specifications for every component we've purchased from them. Is there something specific you're looking for? Patent dates, Constance replied without looking up from her screen. I want to cross-reference every Foster innovation we've purchased with the dates their patents were filed. Genevieve raised an eyebrow but made notes without comment. After 3 years as Constance's assistant, she had learned that her boss's seemingly random research requests usually led to significant business decisions. Should I ask Bartholomew to join us? Genevieve asked, referring to Bartholomew Stone, Porter's chief technology officer. He would have detailed knowledge of all the technical specifications. Not yet. I want to review everything myself first for the next 2 hours. Constance immersed herself in technical documentation that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The hybrid transmission system that had revolutionized Porter's fuel efficiency ratings was patented by Foster Industries on March 15, 2021. The advanced engine management software that had earned industry awards was patented 6 months later. The lightweight composite materials that had reduced vehicle weight while improving safety ratings followed in December of the same year. What struck her as suspicious was not the innovations themselves, but their rapid succession and their apparent departure from Foster's previous research focus. Prior to 2021, Foster Industries had concentrated primarily on traditional automotive components, with only incremental improvements over existing technology. Then suddenly, within the span of 18 months, they had produced a series of revolutionary breakthroughs that leapfrogged the entire industry. Constance opened her secure phone and dialed a number she had memorized during her years climbing the corporate ladder. Josephine Pierce. Speaking. Josephine, it's Constance. I need you to conduct some confidential research for me. Josephine Pierce, Porter Automotive's legal counsel, had built her reputation on discretion and thoroughness. What kind of research? Patent searches. I want you to look for any prior claims applications or disputes related to specific Foster Industries patents. I'm sending you a list of patent numbers. Look for anything unusual in the filing process, any challenges that were withdrawn, any legal actions that were settled out of court. That's going to take some time. Patent research can be complicated, especially if we're looking for buried disputes. Take whatever time you need. And Josephine, this stays between us for now. Understood. Constance ended the call and returned to her analysis, but her concentration was broken by her intercom buzzing. Mrs. Porter Genevieve's voice carried a note of confusion. "There's a man here claiming to be Vincent Morrison's brother. He says it's urgent and personal." Constance felt her pulse quicken. Send him in. Augustus Morrison bore a striking resemblance to his brother, though his appearance reflected the polish of corporate success, rather than 3 years of mountain living dressed in an expensive suit, and carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to boardroom negotiations. He nevertheless looked deeply troubled as he approached Constance's desk. "Mrs. Porter, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I'm Augustus Morrison, and I believe you may have recently encountered my brother Vincent. What makes you think that Augustus reached into his briefcase and withdrew a photograph?" "Because yesterday evening a forest ranger reported seeing a woman matching your description visiting an unauthorized campsite in Raven's Nest Gorge. The same campsite where my brother has been living for the past 3 years. Constance studied Augustus carefully, noting the tension in his posture and the dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had not slept well recently, even if that were true. "Why? Would it concern you?" "Mrs. Porter, I know this may sound strange, but Vincent is not well. He's been suffering from paranoid delusions for years, convinced that he's the victim of some vast corporate conspiracy. He was a brilliant engineer once, but his mental illness has led him to believe that his former business partner stole his work and destroyed his career." The certainty in Augustus's voice was unsettling, particularly because it directly contradicted everything Vincent had told her. "You're saying he's delusional? I'm saying he's sick. He's estranged from his daughters, divorced from his wife, living in the wilderness because he can't accept that his business failed through his own poor decisions. If he's told you some story about being the victim of corporate theft, please understand that these are the fantasies of a deeply troubled man." Constance leaned back in her chair, studying Augustus with new attention. "What exactly do you want from me?" "I want to help my brother, get the medical treatment he needs, but first I need to know what he's told you, and whether he's shown you any of his so-called evidence." The phrase, "so-called evidence," struck Constance as particularly telling. If Vincent's documentation was indeed the product of delusion, why would Augustus be so concerned about it? "Mr. Morrison, what you do for a living?" "I'm Vice President of Strategic Development at Foster Industries." The revelation hit Constance like a physical blow. Augustus Morrison worked for the very company his brother accused of theft, and he was actively working to discredit Vincent's claims while portraying him as mentally ill. "I see," Constance said carefully. "And how long have you worked for Foster Industries?" 4 years. "I was hired specifically to help the company expand its research and development capabilities." "Quite a coincidence, don't you think? Your brother accuses Foster Industries of stealing his work, and you happen to work for the same company." Augustus's expression tightened. "Mrs. Porter, I understand why Vincent's story might seem compelling, but the truth is that Reginald Foster hired me precisely because he wanted to help my family deal with Vincent's illness. Mr. Foster has been extraordinarily generous, paying for Vincent's psychiatric treatment and supporting his daughter's education. Even though Vincent refuses to accept help supporting his daughter's education, Evangeline is a senior at the University of Washington studying engineering. Oilia is pre-med. At the same institution, their tuition room and board, everything is paid for by a Foster Industries scholarship program." The implications of Augustus's revelation were staggering. If Foster Industries was paying for Vincent's daughter's education, it created a powerful leverage point against any attempt Vincent might make to expose Foster's alleged crimes. "Where are Vincent's daughters now? Do they know where their father is living?" "They believe he's receiving treatment at a private facility. They don't know he's been living homeless in the mountains." "Mrs. Porter, can you imagine what it would do to them to learn that their father, whom they remember as a successful engineer, has been reduced to this?" Constance found herself caught between competing narratives, each with enough credibility to be believable. Either Vincent was indeed a victim of massive corporate fraud, whose own brother had been co-opted by his enemy, or Augustus was telling the truth about a mentally ill sibling who had constructed an elaborate fantasy to explain his failures. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your concern for your brother, but I'm not sure why you're telling me all this. Because Reginald Foster is concerned that Vincent may try to involve innocent parties in his delusions. If he's approached you with claims about stolen patents or corporate conspiracies, Mr. Foster wants you to know that these are the products of mental illness, not reality. The mention of Foster's personal concerns seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Reginald Foster sent you here. Mr. Foster is aware that Vincent has been making contact with people outside his usual isolation. He's worried that Vincent's condition may be deteriorating, and that he might become dangerous to himself or others. Constance stood and walked to her window using the movement to buy time. While she processed the implications of Augustus's visit, the timing was suspicious. Less than 24 hours after she had promised to help Vincent, his brother appeared in her office with a completely different version of events. Mr. Morrison, thank you for bringing this to my attention. If I have any future contact with your brother, I'll keep your concerns in mind. Augustus rose to leave, but paused at the door. Mrs. Porter, I hope you understand that my primary concern is for Vincent's welfare and the welfare of his daughters. If there's anything you can do to encourage him to accept professional help, our family would be deeply grateful. After Augustus left, Constance returned to her computer screen. But now the patent dates and technical specifications seemed to carry entirely different implications. Was she looking at evidence of the crime of the century, or at the obsessive documentation of a man whose mental illness had led him to construct an elaborate conspiracy theory? Her secure phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Constance, it's Josephine. I found something interesting in those patent searches you requested. What kind of interesting? Several of the Foster Industries patents you asked about were originally filed by different inventors, who later withdrew their applications. In each case, the withdrawal was followed within weeks by Foster Industries filing nearly identical patents. Withdrawn how legal settlements, confidential agreements that sealed all records of the original applications. It's not illegal, but it's highly unusual to see this pattern repeated across multiple innovations. Constance felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fit together. Josephine, I want you to expand the search. Look for any other patents where Foster Industries became the holder after original inventors withdrew their applications that could take days. The records are deliberately obscured. Take the time and find out everything you can about a man named Vincent Morrison. Employment history, patent applications. Any legal actions involving Foster Industries. Should I be concerned about the scope of this investigation? Constance looked out at the Seattle skyline, thinking about a man living in the wilderness with evidence that could either expose the crime of the century or prove his own mental illness. Josephine, I think we may be dealing with something much bigger than supplier. Contracts keep everything confidential and document everything you find. As the afternoon wore on, Constance found herself facing a decision that would determine not only Vincent Morrison's fate, but potentially the future of her own company. The evidence was pointing toward a conspiracy of staggering scope, but the stakes of being wrong were equally staggering. By evening, she had made her choice. Tomorrow, she would return to Raven's Nest Gorge not just with food, but with questions that would either vindicate Vincent Morrison or expose the depths of his delusion. Either way, she intended to learn the truth. The morning fog clung to Raven's Nest Gorge like a shroud as Constance made her way down the familiar trail. But this time her steps carried the weight of difficult questions rather than simple charity. In her backpack, alongside another supply of food, she carried printouts of patent documents, Foster Industries contracts, and most troubling of all, notes from her conversation with Augustus Morrison. Vincent was working at his forge when she arrived, hammering a piece of metal into what appeared to be a specialized tool. The rhythmic striking echoed through the gorge, and she noticed that his movements had a precision that spoke of years of practice. This was not the random activity of someone trying to pass time, but purposeful work toward a specific goal. Constance, he said, looking up as she approached, I wasn't expecting you back so soon. We need to talk, Vincent, about your brother Augustus. The hammer froze mid-strike, and Vincent's entire body went rigid. He set the tool down carefully, as if buying time. To compose himself, Augustus came to see you yesterday afternoon in my office. Constance set down her backpack and faced him directly. He told me some very different things about your situation. Vincent walked to the edge of his camp, staring out over the gorge when he spoke. His voice carried a weariness that seemed to age him a decade. Let me guess, he told you I'm mentally ill. Paranoid delusions, unable to accept that my business failed through my own incompetence. Something like that. He also mentioned that he works for Foster Industries. Vincent's bitter laugh echoed off the canyon walls. Of course he does. Reginald always was thorough in his destructions. Vincent, he told me Foster Industries is paying for your daughter's education, that they think you're receiving treatment at a private facility. The words hit Vincent like physical blows. He gripped the nearest tree trunk, his knuckles white against the bark. For several minutes he stood in complete silence while Constance watched emotions play across his face, pain, rage, and finally a devastating sadness. They think I'm in treatment, he repeated quietly. My daughters think their father is getting help instead of. He gestured helplessly at his camp. Vincent, if Foster is manipulating your family, if he's using your daughters as leverage, then we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Vincent returned to his work area and began pulling items from various storage containers. You want to understand what we're dealing with, then you need to know the whole story. He spread a tarp on the ground and began arranging documents, photographs, and what appeared to be recorded materials in chronological order. The collection was far more extensive than what he had shown her before. This is Dr. Montgomery Ward, Vincent said, pointing to a photograph of a distinguished man in his 60s, former colleague, head of automotive research at Morrison Foster Technologies. 3 weeks after I discovered Reginald's theft, Montgomery died in a car accident, single vehicle collision, no witnesses. Constance felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. You think Foster had him killed? I think Montgomery was about to support my claims about the stolen patents. I think his death was very convenient for Reginald. Vincent moved to another photograph. This is Dr. Richard Stevens, another colleague who was willing to testify about the timeline of my innovations 2 days before his scheduled deposition. He suffered what his doctors called a nervous breakdown, complete psychological collapse. He's been in a private psychiatric facility ever since. The pattern Vincent was describing suggested a level of systematic intimidation that went far beyond simple business competition. How many people were willing to support your claims? 7. Originally, Montgomery died. Stevens was institutionalized. 3 others had their families threatened and withdrew their support. 1 received a job offer from a Foster subsidiary that required him to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that left just me. Vincent pulled out a thick folder filled with legal documents. This is the custody battle that destroyed my marriage. Reginald's lawyers provided character witnesses who testified that I was becoming increasingly paranoid and potentially dangerous. They submitted psychological evaluations that I never consented to based on observations by people I had never met. Constance examined the documents, noting the letterhead of one of the country's most prestigious law firms. These lawyers represent some of the biggest corporations in America. They represent Reginald Foster, and apparently their definition of legal advocacy includes destroying the lives of inconvenient witnesses. Vincent's voice grew harder as he continued. My ex-wife was convinced I was having a breakdown. The court awarded her full custody and restricted my visitation rights within 6 months. She had moved across the country with my daughters, but Augustus said Foster is paying for their education. Foster's a scholarship program for children of former employees experiencing difficulties presented as charity, but the fine print includes clauses about maintaining family stability and avoiding public controversy. If I were to make any public claims about Foster Industries, my daughters would lose their funding immediately. The scope of Foster's manipulation was breathtaking in its thoroughness. Every potential ally neutralized, every family relationship poisoned, every avenue of legal recourse blocked through intimidation or financial leverage. Vincent, this goes beyond corporate espionage. What you're describing is organized destruction of witnesses and evidence. What I'm describing is how Reginald Foster operates. He doesn't just steal innovations. He destroys the innovators so completely that no one would believe their claims even if they managed to voice them. Vincent opened another container and withdrew a small digital recorder. But Reginald made one mistake. He assumed that because I couldn't fight him legally, I would simply disappear quietly. What's on the recorder? Conversations recorded over the course of 18 months before I discovered the theft. Reginald discussing plans to patent my innovations under his name. Reginald laughing about the legal strategies he would use if I ever tried to Challenge him, Reginald, explaining to his lawyers how to systematically destroy my credibility. Constance stared at the device. Vincent, if these recordings are authentic, they're evidence of criminal conspiracy. They're authentic, but they're also legally inadmissible because they were recorded without consent. Reginald's lawyers made sure I understood that when they had me served with restraining orders preventing me from contacting Reginald, approaching Foster Industries property, or discussing my allegations with any Foster employees or contractors, violation would result in immediate arrest. The legal web Foster had constructed around Vincent was designed not just to silence him, but to make any attempt at justice appear to be the actions of an unstable person violating court orders. How did you end up here in the mountains? Vincent looked around his camp as if seeing it for the first time after the divorce, after the restraining orders, after my professional reputation was destroyed. I had two choices. I could accept defeat and disappear quietly, or I could spend whatever time I had left gathering evidence that might someday matter. So you chose the mountains. I chose to survive until I could find someone with the resources and credibility to help me fight back, someone who couldn't be intimidated or bought. Vincent met her eyes directly. I chose to wait for you. The weight of his statement settled over Constance like a mantle of responsibility. Vincent, Augustus warned me that you might be dangerous, that your condition might be deteriorating. Augustus is terrified. Vincent replied, he knows I'm telling the truth, but he also knows that challenging Reginald would cost him his career, and probably his safety, so he's chosen to believe I'm insane, rather than face the reality of what his employer has done. What about your daughters? Do they know anything about what really happened? Vincent's composure finally cracked when he spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. They were 8 and 5 when this started. They remember their father as someone who left them, who chose his obsessions over his family. They don't know that I've been fighting for 3 years to find a way back to them. That wouldn't destroy their futures. Constance watched Vincent struggle with emotions that clearly went far deeper than professional grievances. This was a father who had been systematically separated from his children through manipulation and legal maneuvering. Vincent, if we expose Foster, if we prove your claims, what happens to your daughter's education funding? They lose everything. Their tuition, their housing, their futures. Unless Vincent looked at her with desperate hope, unless someone with resources was willing to ensure they didn't suffer for their father's pursuit of justice, the request hung in the air between them. And Constance realized that Vincent was asking her not just to help him fight Foster, but to potentially take responsibility for his daughter's welfare. You're asking me to risk my company, my reputation, and my personal fortune on the word of a man living in the wilderness. I'm asking you to risk everything on the truth, Vincent corrected. But yes, I understand the magnitude of what I'm requesting. Constance studied the evidence spread across the top documents, recordings, photographs, and 3 years of meticulous documentation compiled by a man who had lost everything except his determination to seek justice. Vincent, if we do this, if we take on Foster Industries, we're not just challenging a company, we're challenging a system that allowed this to happen, I know. But Constance, how many other innovators has Reginald destroyed? How many breakthrough technologies has he stolen? How many families has he torn apart? Vincent's voice grew stronger as he continued. This isn't just about my revenge anymore. It's about stopping him from doing this to anyone else. As afternoon shadows began lengthening across the gorge, Constance found herself at a crossroads that would define not only her own future, but potentially the future of corporate accountability. In American business, the evidence before her suggested a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the automotive industry, protected by legal manipulation and systematic intimidation. Vincent, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest, of course. Is there any possibility, any chance at all, that your perception of these events has been distorted by the trauma you've experienced? Vincent considered the question seriously. Before answering Constance 3 years ago, I would have said there was no way someone could orchestrate the kind of conspiracy I'm describing, but I've lived through it. I've seen how money and legal power can reshape reality itself, how victims can be transformed into perpetrators through careful manipulation of facts and relationships. He gestured toward his documentation. But the evidence speaks for itself. The timeline, the patents, the recordings, they tell a story that doesn't depend on my mental state Or my interpretation of events? Constance nodded slowly. Then tomorrow, I want you to come to Seattle with me. I want my legal team to review everything you have, and I want to start building a case that will either vindicate you completely or prove conclusively that your claims cannot be substantiated. And if the evidence proves I'm right, then we destroy Reginald Foster and everyone who helped him, and we make sure your daughters never want for anything again. Vincent's smile was the first genuine expression of hope Constance had seen from him. Constance, you should know that, once we start down this path, Reginald will try to destroy you two. He'll use every resource at his disposal to discredit you, to undermine your company, to turn your allies against you. Let him try, Constance replied. I've been building my reputation for 20 years. Let's see how it holds up against the truth. As they began packing Vincent's evidence for transport to Seattle, neither of them could imagine how completely their investigation would transform not only the automotive industry, but the broader landscape of corporate accountability. But in that moment, they were simply two people who had decided that justice was worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor of Porter Automotive Technologies felt like ascending through layers of a previous life. For Vincent Morrison, he stood rigidly beside Constance, wearing the first business suit he had owned in 3 years, purchased that morning from a downtown Seattle department store. The fabric felt foreign against skin accustomed to rough canvas and wool, and the fluorescent lighting seemed harsh after years of natural illumination when the elevator doors opened. Vincent hesitated, for a moment overwhelmed by the familiar sights and sounds of corporate life. He had abandoned the soft hum of air conditioning, the muted conversations of business meetings, the subtle electronic chimes of computers and phones. All of it triggered memories of a world where he had once belonged. Vincent Constance's voice was gentle but concerned. Are you all right? Just remembering, he replied quietly. It's been a long time since I've been inside a building like this. Genevieve Walsh looked up from her desk as they approached, her professional smile faltering slightly when she saw Vincent. Despite the new clothes and his attempt to tame his hair, 3 years of outdoor living had left marks that no amount of grooming could completely hide. Mrs. Porter, your legal team is waiting in conference room A. They've reviewed the preliminary materials you sent over. Thank you. Genevieve, hold all calls unless it's an emergency conference room. Overlooked downtown Seattle through floor to ceiling, windows that made Vincent feel exposed and vulnerable. Around the polished mahogany table sat 3 people who would determine whether his years of evidence gathering could translate into actionable legal strategy. Josephine Pierce Porter's legal counsel had spread Vincent's documentation across one end of the table. With the precision of someone accustomed to complex litigation, beside her sat Reginald Mills, a patent attorney Constance had retained specifically for this investigation, and Evangeline Pfizer, a paralegal whose expertise in research had already proven invaluable. Mr. Morrison, Josephine said, standing to shake his hand. We've spent the morning reviewing your materials. What you've documented is extraordinary. Extraordinary enough to build a case? Vincent asked, his voice betraying the anxiety he felt about returning to a world of legal procedures and corporate politics. Extraordinary enough to suggest criminal conspiracy, spanning multiple years and involving systematic fraud. Reginald Mills replied, but building a prosecutable case will require more than documentation. We need witnesses, corroborating evidence, and proof of damages that extends beyond your personal situation. Evangeline Fisher consulted her notes. Mr. Morrison, we've identified 17 other engineers whose patent applications were withdrawn shortly before Foster Industries filed similar patents. We've located contact information for 12 of them. Vincent felt his pulse quicken. Are any of them willing to talk? 3 have agreed to preliminary conversations. 2 others hung up when we mentioned Foster Industries. The rest haven't returned our calls yet. Josephine activated a digital projector that displayed a timeline spanning the past 8 years. What we're seeing is a pattern that goes far beyond individual theft. Foster Industries appears to have developed a systematic approach to identifying promising innovations, approaching the inventors, and then either acquiring their work through legal manipulation or destroying their ability to compete. The timeline showed dozens of patents acquisitions and what the legal team had euphemistically termed inventor departures from the industry. Vincent studied the display with growing amazement. His own case was not an isolated incident but part of a massive ongoing conspiracy. How many inventors total? Vincent asked. We've identified 43 potential cases over the past 8 years. Evangeline replied. The pattern accelerated significantly after Foster Industries went public and had access to greater financial resources. Constance leaned forward in her chair. What about the recordings Vincent made? Are they useful? Despite the consent issues, Reginald Mills played one of the audio files through the room sound system. Foster's voice filled the conference room with casual cruelty as he discussed strategies for neutralizing inventors who might challenge his patent claims legally inadmissible. In criminal court, Mills said after the recording ended, but potentially powerful in civil proceedings, especially if we can establish a pattern of behavior through other evidence. What about the suspicious deaths and institutionalizations, Vincent? Documented, Constance asked. Josephine's expression grew grim. Dr. Montgomery Ward's death appears to have been thoroughly investigated by local police, who found no evidence of foul play. Dr. Richard Stevens's psychiatric institutionalization was handled by Foster Industries' corporate healthcare provider, with all records sealed under patient confidentiality laws. Vincent felt the familiar weight of frustration settling over him. So even with all this evidence, we still can't prove the most serious aspects of what Foster has done. Not yet. Mills replied, but we may not need to. Financial fraud is easier to prove than physical intimidation, and the patent theft alone represents damages in the hundreds of millions. The conference room door opened, and Nathaniel Porter, Constance's son, entered with an expression of barely controlled anger. Mother, we need to talk privately. Constance glanced at Vincent and her legal team. Can you give us a moment? After the others left, Nathaniel closed the door and turned to face his mother. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Foster Industries is one of our largest suppliers. Reginald Foster sits on the board of the Automotive Innovation Council. If you're planning to accuse him of systematic fraud, you're not just risking our supplier relationships, you're risking our entire position in the industry, Nathaniel. If the evidence proves that Foster built his empire on stolen innovations, then we have a moral obligation to expose him. Moral obligation. Nathaniel's voice rose with disbelief. Mother, Foster Industries represents 12% of our annual revenue. If we lose that relationship, we'll have to lay off hundreds of employees, and if we continue supporting a criminal conspiracy, we become part of it. Nathaniel walked to the window, staring out at the Seattle skyline. Have you considered that this might be exactly what Foster's competitors want? That Vincent Morrison might be a pawn in someone else's game to destroy Foster Industries? The suggestion struck Vincent like a physical blow when he overheard it from the hallway. After 3 years of isolation, the idea that his pursuit of justice might be manipulated by others had never occurred to him. Nathaniel, Constance said firmly, I've seen the evidence myself. This isn't corporate espionage, it's documentation of systematic theft. Evidence compiled by a man who's been living in the wilderness for 3 years, who has every reason to blame Foster for his failures. Mother, you're risking everything we've built on the word of someone who might be fundamentally unreliable. When Vincent and the legal team returned to the conference room, the tension between Constance and her son was palpable. Nathaniel excused himself without making eye contact with Vincent, but his skepticism hung in the air like an accusation. I apologize for the interruption, Constance said. Where were we? Vincent remained standing near the door. Constance, your son raised valid concerns. What if I am being manipulated? What if my evidence is being used to serve someone else's agenda? Josephine looked up from her documents. Mr. Morrison, we've spent hours analyzing your materials, the documentation patterns, the technical specifications, the timeline of events. They're consistent with systematic theft, not manufactured evidence, but I could still be wrong about Foster's motivations. I could be missing crucial context that would change everything. Reginald Mills leaned back in his chair. Vincent, in my 20 years of patent law, I've seen corporate theft many times. What you've documented follows classic patterns of intellectual property fraud. The only unusual aspect is the scope and sophistication of the operation. Evangeline Pfizer opened another folder. Mr. Morrison, we've also found something else. 3 of the engineers we contacted remember you from industry conferences. They remember your presentations, your innovations, and they remember when you suddenly disappeared from the field. She handed Vincent a printed email. This is from Dr. Patricia Williams, formerly of Advanced Automotive Systems. She says she always wondered what happened to the brilliant engineer whose hybrid transmission concepts were suddenly being marketed by Foster Industries. Vincent read the email with growing emotion. Here was validation from someone who remembered his work. Independent of his claims about theft. She's willing to testify? Vincent asked. She's willing to discuss what she remembers about the timeline of your innovations and their appearance in Foster's patents. Constance stood and walked to the timeline display. Vincent, we have a choice to make. We can proceed carefully gathering more evidence and building an airtight case that might take years to develop, or we can move quickly, using what we have now to force Foster into a defensive position. What's the difference? If we move slowly, Foster has time to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and prepare his legal defenses. If we move quickly, we catch him off guard but risk having our case dismissed for insufficient preparation. Vincent looked around the conference room, taking in the expensive furnishings, the city view, and the sophisticated legal documents spread across the table. For 3 years he had dreamed of this moment, sitting in a corporate boardroom with legal representation, finally having the resources to fight back against Foster Industries. How quickly are we talking? Josephine consulted her calendar. The National Automotive Innovation Conference is in 6 weeks. Foster is scheduled to deliver the keynote address about breakthrough innovations in hybrid technology. If we're going to make a public challenge to his credibility, that would be the perfect venue. 6 weeks to build a comprehensive case against one of the most powerful men in the automotive industry. 6 weeks to present enough evidence to destroy his reputation and trigger federal investigations that would uncover the rest. Vincent walked to the windows, looking out at the city that had once been his home. Somewhere in this urban landscape were his daughters, believing their father was receiving psychiatric treatment instead of preparing to reclaim his stolen legacy. If we do this, if we expose Foster publicly, what happens to the other victims, the engineers whose lives he destroyed? Justice. Constance replied simply, for all of them. Vincent turned back to the room. Then let's destroy him. As the legal team began planning their strategy, none of them noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street since morning, or the telephoto camera lens focused on their conference room window. Foster Industries had become aware of Vincent Morrison's emergence from the wilderness, and Reginald Foster was already preparing his response. The war for the truth had begun, and both sides knew that only one could survive. The morning news coverage began at exactly 6. The were delivered with the practiced neutrality that made devastating accusations sound like routine business updates. Constance Porter sat in her home office, coffee growing cold in her hands, as Bartholomew Grant's familiar voice filled the room. Through her wall-mounted television, questions are being raised about the financial stability of Porter Automotive Technologies, following reports of internal disputes over supplier relationships. Sources close to the company suggest that CEO Constance Porter may be pursuing a personal vendetta against longtime partner Foster Industries, potentially jeopardizing hundreds of jobs and millions in shareholder value. The report continued with carefully worded statements from unnamed industry analysts, expressing concern about Porter Automotive's recent strategic decisions. No direct accusations were made, but the implication was clear. Constance Porter was allowing personal issues to compromise her professional judgment. Her secure phone rang. Before the news segment ended, they're calling it a midlife crisis. Nathaniel's voice carried a mixture of anger and desperation. Mother, our stock price dropped 4% in pre-market trading. The board is demanding an emergency meeting. How quickly did this story develop? Constance asked, though she already suspected the answer. The first calls to journalists were made yesterday afternoon. Someone wanted this information. Public immediately. Constance turned off the television and walked to her study, windows looking out at the Seattle waterfront where morning commuters were beginning their daily routines. None of them knew that their normal Thursday morning was unfolding against the backdrop of a corporate war that would determine the future of American innovation. Schedule the board meeting for this afternoon, she said finally, and Nathaniel asked Vincent to come in early today. We need to accelerate our timeline at Porter Automotive headquarters. Vincent Morrison stood in the hallway, outside conference room, reading news coverage on his borrowed smartphone. The articles were appearing with remarkable speed across multiple business publications, each one questioning Constance's judgment while carefully avoiding any mention of the evidence against Foster Industries' sophisticated media campaign, Josephine Pierce observed. Joining him in the hallway, multiple outlets coordinated messaging, all focused on character assassination rather than addressing the substantive allegations. How many news organizations does Foster influence directly? Probably none. But Foster Industries spends millions annually on advertising. Across business media, publishers tend to be careful about alienating major advertisers. Vincent scrolled through another article, this one questioning his own credibility with phrases like disgruntled former employee and extended period of instability. The descriptions were technically accurate while being completely misleading. They're not lying exactly. He said they're just presenting facts in ways that make me look unstable and Constance look irresponsible. Classic reputation management, much more effective than outright denial. Because it's harder to disprove, Genevieve Walsh approached them with visible tension in her posture. Mrs. Porter wants to see you both immediately. We've received some unusual communications this morning in her office. Constance was reviewing a stack of letters and emails that had arrived since the news coverage began. The communications ranged from formal business inquiries to personal messages, but they shared a common theme: concern about her association with Vincent Morrison. This is from the Automotive Safety Council, she said, handing Vincent a formal letter. They're expressing concern about my involvement with someone who has made unsubstantiated allegations against a respected industry leader. Vincent read the letter with growing recognition. 3 of the council members are former Foster Industries executives. Foster helped establish this organization, and this, Constance continued, is from Seattle Business Journal, requesting an interview about my recent strategic decisions. They want to discuss my commitment to shareholder value and fiduciary responsibility. Josephine examined the letterhead. They're building a narrative that you're compromising your company for personal reasons. By the time we're ready to present evidence against Foster, the business community will already believe you're acting irrationally. How do we counter this? By moving faster than they expect. Vincent replied, if we can present compelling evidence before their character assassination campaign takes hold, we shift the narrative from personal conflict to criminal conspiracy. Evangeline Fisher entered, carrying a folder that she set before Constance with visible excitement. We've made contact with Dr. Patricia Williams, and she's agreed to a video conference this afternoon. But more importantly, we found someone else, another victim, Dr. Marcus Graham, former chief technology officer at Advanced Engine Dynamics. His company was developing revolutionary fuel efficiency improvements when Foster Industries acquired them in what appeared to be a friendly merger. 2 months later, Graham was terminated for philosophical differences with new management. Vincent felt a spark of recognition. I remember Graham's work. His fuel injection innovations were groundbreaking. According to Graham, those innovations are now being marketed by Foster Industries under different patent numbers. He's been unemployed for 2 years because Foster's legal team has implied to potential employers that he violated non-disclosure agreements. Constance leaned forward. Is he willing to testify? He's willing to meet today if possible. But Mrs. Porter, there's something else. Evangeline's expression grew troubled. Graham mentioned that he's been contacted recently by someone claiming to represent Augustus Morrison. Someone who suggested that pursuing action against Foster Industries might be dangerous for his family. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Foster Industries was not simply defending against their investigation, it was actively intimidating potential witnesses. What kind of contact? Vincent asked, his voice tight with concern. Phone calls. Casual mentions of where Graham's children go to school, where his wife works, nothing explicitly threatening, but clear enough to communicate that Foster Industries knows how to reach his family. Vincent stood and walked to the windows, his reflection overlaying the cityscape beyond. He's doing to Graham what he did to me. Systematic isolation, intimidation, destruction of professional relationships. Vincent, Constance said gently, are you prepared for Foster to escalate his tactics against us? I've been prepared for 3 years. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next. Before Constance could respond, her intercom buzzed with urgency. Mrs. Porter, your brother-in-law is here. He says it's urgent family business, Maximilian. Porter's younger brother Theodore rarely visited the corporate offices, preferring his role as a silent investor to active involvement in company operations. His presence in Constance's office, particularly without advanced notice, suggested problems that extended beyond normal business concerns. "Constance, we need to discuss your recent activities," Theodore said without preamble. "I've been contacted by several board members who are concerned about the direction you're taking. The company concerned about what specifically about your association with Vincent Morrison and this investigation into Foster Industries. Constance, Foster Industries represents a significant portion of our supply chain. If you're planning to make public accusations against Reginald Foster, you're risking relationships that took years to build." Vincent excused himself from the conversation, but he could hear Theodore's voice rising in the outer office as family business intersected with corporate strategy. "She's letting personal feelings override business judgment," Theodore was saying. "The board has a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders that supersedes any individual vendetta." When Vincent returned to the office, Constance's expression had hardened into the determined look he was beginning to recognize as her response to pressure. "What did he want?" Vincent asked. "To convince me that pursuing Foster isn't worth the risk to the company. He suggested that the board might consider removing me as CEO if I continue this investigation." "And your response?" "I told him that if the board wants to remove me for pursuing justice, they're welcome to try, but they'll have to explain to shareholders why they're protecting a criminal conspiracy." Josephine looked up from her legal documents. "Constance, we should expect the pressure to intensify. Foster Industries has resources to maintain this campaign indefinitely. Then we accelerate our timeline even further. How quickly can we arrange meetings with the other victims?" "Dr. Williams is available this afternoon. Dr. Graham can meet tomorrow morning. But Vincent, there's something else we need to discuss." Vincent turned toward her with growing apprehension. "Your brother Augustus called this morning. He wants to meet with you privately. He says it's about your daughters." The mention of Evangeline and Oilia sent a chill through Vincent that had nothing to do with Seattle's autumn weather. If Foster was willing to intimidate other victims' families, there was no reason to believe Vincent's daughters would be exempt from similar pressure. "What did he say exactly?" "That your daughters have been asking questions about their father's treatment facility. They want to visit you, and Augustus is having difficulty explaining why that's not possible." Vincent closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years' worth of separation from his children pressing down on him in pursuing justice. He was risking the possibility of ever rebuilding his relationship with them. "Vincent," Constance said quietly, "if you want to step back from this investigation to protect your family, I'll understand." "No," Vincent replied, his voice gaining strength. "Foster has been using my daughters as leverage for 3 years. If I back down now, he'll continue using them forever. The only way to protect them is to destroy his ability to threaten anyone." As afternoon moved toward evening, the scope of Foster Industries' counterattack became increasingly clear. News coverage continued to question Constance's judgment. Board members received anonymous packages of information about Vincent's mental health. History and potential witnesses found themselves facing subtle but unmistakable intimidation. But with each new pressure tactic, Vincent and Constance's resolve hardened. They were no longer simply investigating patent theft, they were fighting for the principle that truth could triumph over power, that justice could survive systematic corruption. "Josephine," Constance said, as the legal team prepared to leave for the day, "I want you to file a formal complaint with the FBI's Corporate Fraud Division. Tomorrow morning. Are you sure? Once we involve federal investigators, there's no turning back." "There's already no turning back," Vincent replied. "Foster made sure of that when he started this campaign against us as darkness settled over Seattle." Vincent stood again at the conference room windows, looking out at a city where his daughters were living their lives, without knowing their father was fighting to reclaim his legacy and their future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures, and new evidence of just how far Reginald Foster was willing to go to protect his empire of stolen innovations. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Vincent Morrison felt something approaching hope, not because the battle was easier than expected, but because he finally had allies willing to fight beside him regardless of the cost. The FBI field office in downtown Seattle occupied 3 floors of a glass tower that reflected the overcast morning sky like a mirror Vincent Morrison sat in. An interview room that smelled of industrial carpet and recycled air, watching Agent Genevieve Cooper arrange case files with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to complex financial investigations. Agent Cooper was younger than Vincent, had expected perhaps 40, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she had built her career on cases that other investigators found too complicated to pursue. Her questions came in rapid succession, each one designed to test the consistency of his claims. Mr. Morrison, you've alleged that Foster Industries has systematically stolen innovations from dozens of engineers over an 8-year period that represents a conspiracy involving hundreds of millions in fraudulent profits. I've documented what I experienced and what I've discovered about others. The scope surprised me too. Agent Cooper opened a thick folder. We've conducted preliminary verification of your claims. Patent office records show unusual patterns in Foster Industries filings, specifically a high percentage of patents filed shortly after other inventors withdrew similar applications. Vincent felt validation flooding through him. How many cases did you find? 67 potential instances where the timing suggests systematic acquisition of withdrawn innovations. But Mr. Morrison, proving systematic theft requires more than suspicious timing. We need witnesses willing to testify, documentation of the methods used to force withdrawals, and evidence of coordination across multiple cases. What about the recordings I made of Foster discussing his strategies? Legally problematic for criminal prosecution, but they establish his knowledge and intent. Combined with victim testimony and financial records, they could support a conspiracy case. The door opened and Constance Porter entered with Josephine Pierce. They had been meeting with another FBI team that was analyzing the corporate financial aspects of the case. Agent Cooper, Constance said, we've provided complete access to Porter Automotive's purchase records from Foster Industries. What we've discovered is troubling. Agent Cooper gestured for them to sit. What kind of troubling? Overbilling. We've been charged premium prices for innovations that Foster claimed required extensive research and development. If those innovations were actually stolen, then we've been paying inflated costs for fraudulent products. Josephine opened her briefcase. We've also discovered that Foster Industries has been selling identical innovations to multiple automotive companies, each time claiming exclusive development rights. How much money are we discussing? Conservative estimate: Foster Industries has generated over $800 million in revenue from potentially stolen innovations. Porter Automotive alone has paid $47 million in premium pricing for fraudulent exclusivity claims. Agent Cooper made notes with increasing interest. Financial fraud involving hundreds of millions would justify the kind of comprehensive investigation that could uncover the full scope of Foster's operations. Will need detailed financial analysis, victim interviews, and technical verification of the theft claims. How quickly can you arrange meetings with other alleged victims? Dr. Patricia Williams is scheduled for this afternoon, Constance replied. Dr. Marcus Graham, tomorrow morning. I'll want to interview them separately, then together. If their testimony is consistent and credible, we can move to formal criminal investigation. As they left the FBI building, Vincent felt the weight of years of isolation beginning to lift. For the first time since his life had been destroyed, law enforcement was taking his claims seriously and had the resources to investigate them properly. But his sense of hope was immediately complicated by a text message from Augustus. Meet me at Woodland Park. 1 hour. It's about Evangeline and Oilia. Woodland Park occupied several acres of green space in Seattle's North End, featuring walking paths that wound between mature trees and open meadows. Vincent found Augustus sitting on a bench near the rose garden, staring at his phone with an expression that mixed exhaustion with desperation. You look terrible, Vincent observed, sitting beside his brother. I haven't slept in 3 days. Vincent, you have to stop this investigation. Why? Because Foster told you to convince me. Augustus turned toward him with haunted eyes. Because Evangeline called me yesterday, asking why she can't visit her father at his treatment facility. She's been trying to contact the hospital directly, and they have no record of any patient named Vincent Morrison. The words hit Vincent like physical blows. His daughter was trying to find him, and the elaborate fiction Foster had constructed was beginning to unravel. What did you tell her? I told her the facility was very private, that direct contact wasn't allowed during treatment. But Vincent, she's not stupid. She's studying engineering and she's asking technical questions about your condition that I can't answer. Vincent felt 3 years of suppressed emotion, threatening to overwhelm him. I need to see them, Augustus. I need to explain what really happened. You can't. If Foster discovers they know the truth, he'll withdraw their scholarships immediately. If Angeline is in her senior year, Oilia is pre-med, they'll lose everything. So I'm supposed to continue letting them believe their father abandoned them for psychiatric treatment. Augustus pulled out his phone and showed Vincent a photograph his daughters at what appeared to be a university event, smiling and confident, surrounded by friends and obviously thriving academically. Look at them, Vincent. They're happy, they're successful, they have futures. If you expose Foster, if you destroy their financial support, what happens to all of this? Vincent studied the photograph with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. These were young women who had grown up during his 3 years of exile, who had built lives and relationships and dreams without him. Augustus, what if there was a way to expose Foster and still protect their education? There isn't. Foster made sure of that when he structured their scholarships. The contracts specifically void all support. If any family member makes public allegations against Foster Industries or Reginald Foster personally, then we make sure they have other support before we expose him. Augustus shook his head. Vincent, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars tuition, housing, medical school applications. Even with your settlement money, if you win, it would take years to receive payment. But Constance Porter has resources if she's committed to justice. She's committed to protecting the victims' families. You're asking a woman you've known for less than a week to take financial responsibility for your daughter's futures. Based on your word that Foster Industries is guilty of conspiracy, the magnitude of what Vincent was requesting struck him fully. For the first time, he was asking Constance to risk not only her company and reputation, but potentially millions in financial support for people she had never met. Augustus, what would you do if you were in my position? Would you continue hiding in the mountains while Foster profits from stolen work, or would you fight for justice regardless of the personal cost? Augustus was quiet for several minutes, watching joggers pass on the nearby path. Finally, he spoke with a voice that carried deep pain. I would want to fight, but I would also want to protect my children. And I don't know how to do both. Maybe the answer is that we stop trying to do both separately and start working together. What do you mean? Come with me to the FBI, tell them what you know about Foster's operations. From the inside, help me build a case that's so overwhelming that Foster can't escape conviction. Augustus stared at his brother with obvious shock. Vincent, if I testify against Foster Industries, I lose my job immediately. I lose my health care, my pension, my professional reputation. But you helped save dozens of other families from what happened to ours. They sat in silence as the weight of the decision settled between them. Augustus was being asked to sacrifice his career and financial security to support a brother he had spent 3 years believing was mentally ill. I need time to think, Augustus said finally. How much time? The investigation is moving quickly. Foster knows we're building a case and he's escalating his pressure tactics. Yesterday, Dr. Graham received a visit from someone claiming to be a private investigator who wanted to discuss his history of making false accusations. Vincent felt ice in his stomach. Is Graham still willing to testify for now? But Foster is systematically intimidating every potential witness. If we don't move soon, we'll lose our opportunity. That afternoon, Dr. Patricia Williams joined the investigation team via secure video conference from her home in Portland. Her testimony provided crucial corroboration of Vincent's timeline and technical claims. I remember Vincent's presentation at the 2019 Automotive Innovation Symposium. She said, her voice clear. Despite the video connection, his hybrid transmission concept was revolutionary. 6 months later, I saw identical technology being marketed by Foster Industries. Agent Cooper leaned forward. Dr. Williams, are you certain the technology was identical? The gear ratios, the electronic integration, the efficiency curves. Everything matched Vincent's original design specifications. I assumed Foster had licensed the technology, but when I asked about it at the next conference, I was told Vincent was no longer with the company. Josephine Pierce consulted her notes. Dr. Williams, did you maintain any documentation of Vincent's original presentation? I kept the technical handouts he distributed. They're dated and show specifications that predate Foster's patent applications by 8 months. Vincent felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Independent documentation from respected engineers would provide crucial support for his claims, Dr. Williams' agent Cooper said. Would you be willing to testify formally about what you witnessed? Absolutely. What happened to Vincent Morrison represents everything wrong with our industry's approach to innovation. If we don't protect individual inventors, we lose the foundation of technological progress. After the video conference ended, the investigation team reviewed their growing collection of evidence, financial records, victim testimony, technical documentation, and audio recordings were building a comprehensive picture of systematic corporate fraud. Agent Cooper Constance said, "How strong is our case at this point? Strong enough to justify formal criminal investigation. But Mr. Morrison, we need to discuss something important." Vincent looked up from the patent documents he'd been reviewing. "If we proceed with criminal charges, Foster Industries will know about the investigation immediately. Their legal team will begin destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses with greater intensity. Are you prepared for that escalation? What's the alternative? We could continue gathering evidence quietly, building an overwhelming case before revealing our investigation. How long would that take? Months, possibly years." Vincent thought about his daughters, about Dr. Graham's family receiving visits from private investigators, about the other victims still trapped in Foster's web of intimidation. Agent Cooper, Foster has been destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses for 8 years. Every day we delay gives him another opportunity to harm someone else. Then we move forward with formal charges. We move forward, Constance confirmed, and we make sure the case is so strong that Foster Industries can't survive the revelation. As evening approached, Vincent stood once again at the windows of Porter Automotive's conference room. But this time he was not looking at a city that had rejected him. He was looking at a community where his daughters were building their futures, where other victims were finally finding their voices, and where justice was becoming possible. In 3 days, Reginald Foster would deliver his keynote address at the National Automotive Innovation Conference, celebrating breakthrough technologies that had made him one of the most respected figures in American industry. But he would be speaking to an audience that included FBI agents, victim witnesses, and a comprehensive documentation of his 8-year conspiracy to steal the innovations of others. The war for truth was approaching its climax, and Vincent Morrison was finally ready to reclaim everything that had been stolen from him. The Seattle Convention Center's grand ballroom buzzed with the energy of 800 automotive industry leaders gathered for the closing keynote of the National Automotive Innovation Conference. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables filled with executives, engineers, and investors who represented billions in automotive research and development funding. At the head table, Reginald Foster adjusted his tie with the confidence of a man who had built an empire on stolen genius. His presentation materials were arranged precisely before him, each slide celebrating breakthrough innovations that had transformed Foster Industries into one of America's most successful automotive suppliers. Constance Porter sat 3 tables back, her expression carefully neutral as she watched the man who had unknowingly shaped her company's supply chain through 8 years of systematic fraud. Beside her, Vincent Morrison wore a simple black suit that made him nearly invisible among the designer clothing and expensive accessories surrounding them. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Frank Russo, the conference organizer, "please welcome our keynote speaker, Reginald Foster, Chairman and CEO of Foster Industries, who will address the theme Innovation Through Perseverance, Building Tomorrow's Automotive Future." The applause was enthusiastic and sustained. Foster rose from his seat with practiced grace, acknowledging the crowd with the modest wave of someone accustomed to such recognition as he approached the podium. Vincent felt his hands clenching involuntarily. "Thank you for that warm welcome," Foster began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom sound system. "Tonight I want to share with you the story of how Foster Industries has developed some of the most significant automotive innovations of the past decade." Vincent watched the presentation with growing amazement at Foster's audacity. The first slide displayed the hybrid transmission system that Vincent had originally designed, presented as Foster's breakthrough achievement of 2021. The technical specifications were identical to Vincent's original work, down to the precise gear ratios and efficiency calculations. This hybrid transmission represents 3 years of intensive research and development. Foster continued, clicking to the next slide. Our engineering team explored dozens of configurations before achieving this optimal balance of efficiency and performance. The lies came so smoothly that Vincent wondered if Foster had convinced himself they were true. Each innovation presented as Foster's achievement was accompanied by fabricated development timelines and fictional research challenges overcome through Foster's vision and leadership, the key to successful innovation. Foster said, advancing to a slide about engine management software is protecting intellectual property while fostering creative collaboration at Foster Industries. We've created an environment where the best ideas can flourish. Vincent felt Constance's hand touch his arm, gently, a reminder that his moment was approaching. According to their plan, Foster would complete his presentation before Vincent rose to challenge him publicly. The strategy was designed to let Foster commit fully to his lies, before exposing them in conclusion. Foster said after 40 minutes of celebrating stolen achievements, I want to emphasize that true innovation requires not just technical expertise, but also the business acumen to bring revolutionary ideas to market. Foster Industries has succeeded because we understand that great ideas mean nothing without great execution. The applause began again, but it was interrupted by Vincent Morrison, standing slowly from his seat. The movement was subtle at first, just one figure rising among hundreds, but something about the deliberate nature of his action drew attention. Mr. Foster, Vincent called out, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom despite the lack of amplification. I have a question about your innovations. Foster squinted into the audience, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion as he tried to identify the speaker. I'm sorry, could you identify yourself? Vincent began walking toward the front of the ballroom, his movement creating a wave of murmurs and turning heads throughout the audience. My name is Vincent Morrison. I was your business partner and closest friend for 5 years. I'm also the actual inventor of every innovation you just claimed as your own achievement. The ballroom erupted in surprised conversation as Vincent continued his approach to the podium. Foster's face had gone pale, his confident demeanor replaced by obvious shock at seeing a man he believed safely neutralized. Ladies and gentlemen, Foster said into his microphone, his voice suddenly strained. I'm afraid we're witnessing a very unfortunate situation. Mr. Morrison has been suffering from mental illness for several years and has developed paranoid delusions about my company. Vincent reached the front of the ballroom and turned to face the audience. Mental illness is an interesting explanation for having detailed documentation of every innovation Mr. Foster just claimed to have developed. Dr. Patricia Williams stood from her seat near the back of the ballroom. I can verify Mr. Morrison's claims. I attended his presentation of the hybrid transmission concept. 8 months before Foster Industries filed their patent, Dr. Marcus Graham rose from another table. I can also verify the theft of innovations. Foster Industries acquired my fuel injection technology through the same methods they used against Mr. Morrison. Foster gripped the podium with both hands. This is clearly a coordinated attack by disgruntled former employees seeking to damage Foster Industries' reputation. Agent Genevieve Cooper stood near the ballroom entrance, her FBI credentials clearly visible as she approached the front of the room. Mr. Foster, this is Agent Cooper with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are conducting a formal criminal investigation into allegations of systematic patent theft and corporate fraud involving Foster Industries. The murmur of conversation became a roar of shocked discussion as the implications of federal criminal investigation settled over the audience. Reginald Palmer, the conference organizer, approached the podium with obvious distress. Mr. Foster, perhaps we should postpone the remainder of your presentation pending clarification of these allegations. There's nothing to clarify, Foster replied, his voice rising with desperation. Vincent Morrison is a mentally unstable individual who has been living homeless in the mountains for 3 years. His claims are the products of paranoid delusion. Vincent pulled out a tablet computer that Constance had provided. Then perhaps Mr. Foster can explain why his voice appears on recordings, discussing strategies for stealing my innovations and destroying my credibility. He activated an audio file that filled the ballroom through the sound system. Foster's voice, unmistakably clear and recognizable, discussed plans to patent Vincent's hybrid transmission under Foster Industries. Name the beauty of this approach. Foster's recorded voice said, is that by The time Morrison realizes what's happening, we'll own the patents and have legal precedent established. His only recourse would be expensive litigation that he can't afford. The ballroom fell silent, except for Foster's own words condemning him. When the recording ended, 800 industry leaders sat in stunned quiet, processing the reality that one of their most respected colleagues was being exposed as a systematic thief and fraud. That recording was made without my consent, Foster said desperately. It's inadmissible in any legal proceeding. Josephine Pierce stood from her seat. Mr. Foster, I'm legal counsel for Porter Automotive Technologies. We've discovered that your company has charged premium prices for innovations claimed to be exclusive. Developments our financial analysis suggests fraud, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Constance Porter rose to join Vincent at the front of the ballroom. Porter Automotive has been unknowingly supporting this conspiracy. For years, we're terminating all contracts with Foster Industries immediately and cooperating fully with federal investigators. The domino effect was immediate. Other automotive executives began standing, their expressions ranging from shock to anger as they realized their own companies might have been victims of similar fraud. This is a witch hunt. Foster declared, his composure completely shattered. A coordinated attack by competitors who can't match Foster Industries' legitimate achievements. Vincent approached the podium microphone. Mr. Foster, if these are legitimate achievements, then perhaps you can explain the technical specifications of the hybrid transmission you just claimed to have developed. Foster stared at Vincent with the expression of a man watching his world collapse in real time. I don't need to justify my company's innovations to someone suffering from mental illness. Then explain them to the FBI agents who are here to investigate systematic patent theft. Agent Cooper interjected, approaching the podium with formal authority. The ballroom erupted in chaos as journalists began making phone calls. Industry executives started urgent conversations with their legal teams, and conference organizers struggled to maintain order. Foster Industries' stock price, though markets were closed, would face devastating losses. When trading resumed, Vincent found himself surrounded by engineers and executives who remembered his original presentations, who had wondered what happened to the brilliant innovator, who had suddenly disappeared from industry conferences. Their support felt like redemption after 3 years of isolation and doubt. Vincent Morrison said, Dr. Angela Davis, a respected innovation expert, I remember your work from the early conferences. When you disappeared, we all wondered what had happened to one of our most promising researchers. As federal agents began interviewing attendees and gathering evidence, Foster made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. He grabbed the podium microphone and shouted over the chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing the destruction of American innovation by disgruntled employees and government overreach. Foster Industries has created thousands of jobs and revolutionized automotive technology. These attacks are motivated by jealousy. And his words were cut off as Agent Cooper approached with formal documentation. Mr. Foster, we have warrants to search Foster Industries' facilities and financial records. You have the right to remain silent. The sight of one of the industry's most powerful figures being read. His rights at the industry's premier conference would dominate news coverage for weeks. As Foster was escorted from the ballroom, Vincent Morrison stood at the podium where his nemesis had just been celebrating stolen achievements. Ladies and gentlemen, Vincent said into the microphone, his voice steady. Despite the emotional magnitude of the moment, innovation belongs to the innovators. What you've witnessed tonight is what happens when we choose truth over power, justice over convenience. The standing ovation that followed was not just for Vincent's vindication, but for the principle that genius could not be stolen indefinitely, that truth would eventually triumph over the most sophisticated deception. As the conference dissolved into urgent conversations and emergency meetings, Vincent felt the weight of 3 years lifting from his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the legal process unfolded, but tonight justice had finally caught up with Reginald Foster. And somewhere in Seattle, 2 young women would soon learn that their father was not a patient in a psychiatric facility, but a hero who had sacrificed everything to expose the truth. 6 months after Reginald Foster's dramatic downfall at the National Automotive Innovation Conference, Vincent Morrison stood outside the University of Washington's engineering building, watching students hurry between classes in the crisp Seattle morning. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his phone for the third time in 5 minutes, confirming the meeting time Augustus had arranged. The federal courthouse had been Vincent's second home for weeks, as Foster's criminal trial unfolded with devastating efficiency. FBI investigators had uncovered evidence of systematic fraud spanning 8 years involving 67 stolen innovations and over $1 billion in fraudulent profits. Foster Industries had collapsed within days of the conference. Revelation: its stock price falling to zero as partners abandoned the company and suppliers demanded immediate payment. Reginald Foster himself now resided in federal prison, serving a 15-year sentence for conspiracy fraud and racketeering. His personal fortune had been seized to compensate victims, though the financial settlements could never restore the careers and relationships his conspiracy had destroyed. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from Augustus. They're waiting in the engineering lab building, C, third floor. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor marking another step toward a reunion. Vincent had imagined thousands of times during his 3 years in Raven's Nest Gorge. When the doors opened, he saw Augustus standing in the hallway with an expression that mixed apprehension with genuine hope. Vincent, they know everything now about Foster. About what really happened, about why you disappeared. How did they react? Evangeline was furious that we lied to them for so long. Alia cried for 3 hours when she realized you'd been living in the mountains instead of receiving treatment. Augustus led him down a corridor lined with research laboratories until they reached a door marked Advanced Propulsion Systems Lab. Through the glass window, Vincent could see 2 young women hunched over technical drawings, their concentration absolute, as they worked through complex calculations. Evangeline Morrison had grown into a striking resemblance of her mother, with Vincent's eyes and the kind of focused intelligence that made her natural leader among her engineering classmates. Oilia was smaller, more delicate, but Vincent could see the same analytical mind at work as she traced component relationships on a hybrid engine. Schematic: they're designing a new type of electric motor for their senior project. Augustus said quietly, Evangeline has already been accepted to graduate school at MIT. Alia starts medical school next fall, but she's been taking engineering courses to understand your work better. Vincent's throat tightened with emotion. His daughters had not only survived his absence but had chosen to follow paths that honored the legacy he thought he had lost forever. Augustus opened the laboratory door. Evangeline, Oilia, your father is here. The moment stretched across 3 years of separation, grief and misunderstanding. Evangeline looked up from her drawings, her face cycling through expressions of recognition, pain and tentative joy. Alia sat down her pencil, with deliberate care, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragility of the reunion. Dad. Evangeline's voice was barely a whisper. Vincent stepped into the laboratory, taking in the sight of his daughters as accomplished young women rather than the children he had been forced to leave behind. Hello, sweetheart. You've gotten so tall? Oilia rose from her seat, tears already streaming down her face. We thought you had abandoned us. We thought you chose to be sick instead of being our father. I never chose to leave you. Everything I did, everything I sacrificed was to try to find a way back to you. Evangeline approached cautiously, studying his face as if trying to reconcile the man before her with her memories of her father. Uncle Augustus told us about Foster Industries, about what they did to you, Dad. Why didn't you tell us the truth? Because Foster was using your education as leverage against me. If I had fought back 3 years ago, you would have lost your scholarships, your futures, everything you've accomplished, so you lived in the mountains instead. Oilia said, her voice breaking. You lived homeless and alone rather than risk our college tuition. Vincent nodded, unable to trust his voice with words. Evangeline crossed the remaining distance between them and wrapped her arms around her father with the fierce intensity of someone reclaiming something precious that had been lost. Oilia joined them a moment later, and for several minutes the laboratory filled with the quiet sounds of a family healing from years of enforced separation. Dad, Evangeline said, finally, we want to help with your work. We've been studying your original designs, and we think we can improve on some of your innovations. Vincent looked at his daughters with wonder. You've been studying my work after the conference. Constance Porter arranged for us to access your original patents and research notes. Dad, your innovations are extraordinary. The automotive industry has barely begun to realize their potential. Oilia wiped her eyes and returned to the technical drawings we've been working on. Applications for electric vehicle infrastructure. Your hybrid transmission. Concepts could revolutionize charging efficiency. Vincent studied the schematics his daughters had developed, seeing familiar principles applied in ways he had never considered. This is brilliant work. You've taken concepts I developed for combustion engines and adapted them for pure electric systems. We want to license our improvements back to Porter Automotive. Evangeline explained. Constance says the Morrison family should benefit from Morrison innovations. The name brought Vincent's attention back to the broader changes their fight against Foster had triggered. Porter Automotive Technologies had become Morrison. Porter Automotive, with Vincent serving as Chief Innovation Officer and holding a significant equity stake in the company. More importantly, they had established the Morrison Foundation for Inventor Protection, providing legal and financial support for individual innovators facing corporate theft. Dad, Oilia said, "There's something else we want to discuss with you." "What's that?" "We want to change our last names back to Morrison. We want people to know we're proud to be your daughters." Vincent felt tears. He had been holding back for months, finally beginning to flow. "Are you sure that name has been associated with a lot of controversy?" "That name is associated with courage and integrity." Evangeline corrected you. "Fought an 8-year battle against impossible odds because you believed truth was more important than comfort." Augustus stepped forward from where he had been, quietly observing the reunion. "Vincent, I owe you an apology. I chose to believe Foster's lies because they were easier than confronting the truth about what my employer was doing." "Augustus, you were trying to protect your family and your career. I understand the pressure you were under. But I should have trusted my brother over a corporation. I should have investigated your claims instead of dismissing them as mental illness." Vincent embraced Augustus with the warmth of brotherhood restored. "You're here now, that's what matters." The laboratory door opened and Constance Porter entered, carrying coffee and pastries from the university's cafe. Behind her walked Dr. Patricia Williams and Dr. Marcus Graham, both of whom had become close allies in the ongoing effort to reform industry practices. "How's the reunion going?" Constance asked with a smile that transformed her usually serious business demeanor better than I could have imagined. Vincent replied, his arms still around his daughters. Dr. Williams examined the engineering drawings Evangeline and Oilia had been developing. "These adaptations are exceptional. Have you considered presenting them at the next innovation conference? We've been invited to present at the Reform National Automotive Innovation Conference," Evangeline said. "They've restructured it to focus on protecting and promoting individual inventors rather than celebrating corporate achievements." Dr. Graham nodded approvingly. "The Morrison case has changed how the entire industry approaches innovation. Patent theft investigations have increased tenfold, and several major companies have established internal ethics boards to prevent systematic fraud." Constance set down the coffee and joined the group around the technical drawings. "Vincent, the foundation has received applications for support from 47 inventors who believe their work has been stolen. We're funding legal challenges that should expose additional conspiracies." "What about the other victims of Foster's theft?" Vincent asked. "Settlements have been reached in most cases. Dr. Stevens has been released from psychiatric care and is receiving compensation for wrongful institutionalization. The families of deceased inventors are receiving survivor benefits." Vincent walked to the laboratory windows looking out at the university campus where his daughters were building their futures. The irony was not lost on him that after 3 years of isolation in the wilderness, he had found his way back to civilization through a chance encounter with a stranded motorist who had chosen to keep her promise of bringing him food. "Constance, do you ever think about that night on the mountain when you promised to bring me a meal in exchange for fixing your car?" "I think about it every day," she replied. "I promised you food, and you gave me the opportunity to transform an entire industry. What you gave me was worth more than food. You gave me back my future, my family, my purpose." Evangeline looked up from her calculations. "Dad, what are you going to do now? You've won your fight against Foster. You've been vindicated. Your innovations are being recognized. What comes next?" Vincent considered the question while watching students move between classes, pursuing education and careers in a field that was slowly becoming more ethical and accountable because of their Struggle. What comes next is making sure this never happens to another inventor. What comes next is building a system where innovation is protected, where truth matters more than power, where talented people like you can pursue their dreams without fear of having their work stolen. Alia joined him at the window. And what about you personally, Dad? What do you want for yourself? Vincent smiled, feeling genuinely hopeful about the future for the first time in years. I want to watch my daughters change the world. I want to help other inventors protect their innovations, and I want to never again take for granted the privilege of sleeping indoors. The laughter that filled the laboratory was warm and genuine, the sound of a family reunited, and a community committed to justice as afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows. Vincent Morrison understood that his story was not really about revenge against a corporate criminal or vindication of stolen innovations. It was about the power of keeping promises. Constance's promise to bring him food, his promise to seek justice for all victims, society's promise to protect those who advance human knowledge through their creativity and intelligence outside the laboratory windows. Seattle bustled with the energy of a city where innovation flourished under new protections, where corporate accountability had been strengthened, and where a homeless man's quest for justice had transformed an entire industry's approach to recognizing and rewarding genuine achievement. The story that had begun with a broken-down car in a mountain storm had become a testament to the truth that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to let injustice remain hidden. And as Vincent Morrison stood surrounded by his daughters, his friends, and his allies, he knew that the real victory was not in destroying Reginald Foster, but in building a world where Foster's crimes would become impossible to commit 3 years after disappearing into Raven's Nest Gorge with nothing but his integrity and his determination to seek truth. Vincent Morrison had emerged not just as a vindicated inventor, but as a catalyst for systemic change that would protect innovators for generations to come. Justice, it turned out, was indeed worth the wait. The end up next too. More incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a